I think it's time we have the conversation. Is Marcel Reed the right guy for Texas A&M?
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. I'm your host, Matt Galatzan of Texas A&M Aggies on SI. Welcome to Locked On Aggies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your live NFL bets all season long. I am joined by Zach Dimmitt today. And Zach, Marcel Reed has not played particularly well over the last few weeks. To end the season, obviously he struggled against Miami, throwing 2 interceptions. It didn't help that he was sacked 7 times as well. Completed 25 of 39 passes, 237 yards. But over the last 5 real games, we're not going to count Samford in this equation because he barely played in that game. He only threw 15 passes, threw 3 touchdowns. But against LSU, Missouri, South Carolina, Texas, and Miami, their 5 last real games of the season, he threw 8 interceptions. 2 against LSU, did not throw one against Missouri, and then 2 against South Carolina, 2 against Texas, and 2 again against Miami. It became a disturbing trend. That he was turning the ball over quite a bit. And he also wasn't that accurate. 57% against LSU, 56% against South Carolina, 62.5% against Texas, and then, 64% against Miami, but they couldn't move the football. And a lot of that was due to Marcel Reed's struggles. He was overthrowing receivers. He was a little bit inaccurate here and there. And in the tough games that they have played, particularly in the big time games over the last 2 weeks with Texas and Miami, he really did struggle, and he was kind of a net negative for Texas A&M. And I don't think that's all on him. I'm not saying it is, but I think it's at least time that we start to consider the idea of the conversation that is Marcel Reed the right guy for Texas A&M. I think that I'm not sitting here calling for Marcel Reed to enter the transfer portal or to be benched or for them to bring in somebody else. But I think the conversation is worth having because you're kind of tied to this guy, and this is the guy that you are going to rely on to lead you next season again. And he hasn't really proven that he can get it done on a big time stage, and I think that that's an issue.
Yeah, especially at this level with the expectations that A&M has. If you're Mike Elko, you can't necessarily ride with him just because he's a great leader, he's a great personality, he's a great character. It's a performance-based business. These are professionals at this point. And so you have to have the conversation at the very least, because it has not really been good at all into the biggest games of the season for A&M. Against Texas, he doesn't finish with the touchdown pass. He, 2 late interceptions that essentially seal that game. He hadn't really been playing poorly or anything before the fourth quarter against Texas. It was just more A&M's offense as a whole was not playing well. So you can't really put all the blame on him for that loss. However, I think the Miami loss, you mentioned the 7 sacks. He's not really getting much help there, but man, just imagine the things that A&M could have potentially done on Saturday had he not accounted for the 3 turnovers. There was that fumble that he had that was just really weird. It was really awkward the way that he fumbled it. The first interception he threw against Miami, I love Marcel Reed. That was one of the worst passes that I've seen him throw. It was just not even close. He's a human. He's going to make mistakes, but you can't have that happen on the biggest stage and one of the biggest games in program history. Of course, Miami didn't end up doing anything with that turnover because both offenses were literally non-existent. But if you keep that drive going, maybe you get a field goal, maybe you get a touchdown. And it was just one of the worst interceptions I've seen him throw. He finished with a season high 15 carries So too reliant on the legs, I think, because he was probably, not seeing the field as well as he would have liked to. He did have a great deep pass to Mario Craver, a few nice passes in there, but he also finished with a season high 39, tied his season high for 30 with 39 pass attempts, and only finishes with 237 yards. The downfield production was just not there, despite a lot of action in the pocket. I don't know. I just think that you have to have that conversation. Do you bring in a quarterback for potential competition? I don't know about that. It's going to be hard to find a quarterback at Marcel Reed's level in the portal, because despite his mistakes, he's still an amazing player. He still had some Heisman level moments this season, so you can't just completely give up on him. But it is a little bit concerning. You think about the last two games this season and the Texas game last year, just has not been his best at all. So you kind of have that. You have to have that conversation at the least.
Yeah, and look, given his strides from year one as the starter when he took over for Connor Wegman last year to this year, I think he made significant strides. I think he became a much better quarterback. Can he make the same level of improvement from year 2 to year 3? I'm not so sure, because Colin Klein is gone now.
Yep.
And Colin Klein was kind of the perfect offensive coordinator for Marcel Reed. His
they had a
system
great relationship.
they had a great relationship. That system fit Marcel Reed's strengths to a T, with the RPO, quick passing game type stuff. It was, it wasn't an overly complicated system. It was very quarterback friendly. So now with Holman Wiggins, and we're going to talk more about the offensive coordinator and stuff in our last segment, but with Holman Wiggins, how much does all of that change? I don't know. I think he probably would run the same thing to a certain degree. Maybe he'll put his own spin on it. Maybe he'll, choose to do things a little bit differently. But I think that the meat and potatoes of that system is going to remain the same. Is that conducive to Marcel Reed taking a big step forward next year? I'm not so sure, because it hasn't worked on big stages the last 2 years. When Marcel Reed has played well over the last couple of years, it has been against, Notre Dame this past year. I thought he played really well in that game, although his completion percentage was god-awful. I think he was like 17 of 37 in that game, and it was the explosive plays from Mario Craver and Casey Concepcion that really made the difference there, more so than Marcel himself. The second half against South Carolina, that's the worst team in the SEC, the worst defense in the SEC, arguably. Like, how much does that really tell us? I know that Marcel has the tools to be a good quarterback. I think he needs to hone in on his mechanics. I think he needs to make better decisions. I think he needs to calm his brain down a little bit, because it kind of seems like when he's flustered and when people get after him and he can't get out of the pocket with his legs, he tends to make some big time mistakes, or sometimes he looks to run a little bit too soon when he should sit back there and maybe go through his progressions a little bit. It's a tough conversation to have, because if you are going to make a change, I think that you have to make a big swing, right? You have to go after, like, you can't sit there and rock with like Miles O'Neill or Hellman Kasuga. You'd have to bring in somebody elite, and there are a lot of elite quarterbacks in the portal right now. But are any of them better than Marcel Reed? I'm not so sure. I mean, I heard a guy on granted, this is just Barstool Sports, but I heard a guy on Barstool Sports, I can't remember his name because I don't really follow it, but he basically said 130 programs would love for Marcel Reed to come back to Texas A&M. I think that's a little bit harsh. I think that there's a reason he was a Heisman candidate all year long. The question is, do you feel confident in him enough to move forward into the future with him as your starting quarterback next year? And do you think that he can bring you a national championship? Because if you don't think that he can, maybe it's time to have that conversation.
Yeah, the Mike Elko has set the expectation that this is a national championship level program. Making the playoff is a big step. Just because they lost at home doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden going to regress next year. I have a lot of faith in A&M moving forward, but yeah, you can't just settle at the quarterback position. You have to get a guy who you think is going to be able to take you over the top. And clearly, despite some of the defensive issues this year, I think this is a very solid defense that you can lean on moving forward. You're going to lose some guys, but Mike Elko, I think once they get the run defense figured out, those things are going to be fine. You've got the receivers, you've got the running backs for the future, and so yeah, it really is just a question about the quarterback because you know past 2 games, 0 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 5 total turnovers. That can't happen. So I have a lot of faith in Marcel Reed. The good thing is that he has a great head on his shoulders. He's not going to get overly down on himself. I think he's really going to attack the off season very strongly. And so, until further notice next season, you just got to give him another shot because he's a primary reason that A&M has gotten to this point. So you have to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt, but the conversation still, of course, has to be had.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to be on the record for the commenters on YouTube and our listeners. I believe in Marcel Reed. I think that he can get better, and I do think that he is the guy. But the question is not whether or not we think he is the guy. It's whether or not we think Mike Elko thinks he's the guy.
Right.
And Holman Wiggins thinks he's a guy. And I think that is probably up in the air based on what happened over the last few weeks of the regular season when you were, in the center of the college football conversation. So if you are going to make a change, you're probably going to have to go to the portal. But Texas A&M also has a lot of other needs in the portal, and we're going to tell you exactly what those are and who we think could be fits for those needs up next. There's nothing like college football season. Tailgates, packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, and prices jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. I love being able to see the view from my seat before buying, so I know exactly what I'm getting. And the zone deals really stand out. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Before we get into this segment, I just want to give a quick shout out to our loyal listeners. Thank you so much for making Locked On Aggies your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, please go check out our new Everydayer Club. I know that Aggie Land is all about those, all about the maroon and white, and all about Kyle Field and that football team, and the basketball team, and Bucky McMillan and Mike Elko, and everything in between. And if you want to access an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Aggies so you can listen to all the latest updates about your Texas A&M news, the Everydayer Club is for you. It's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. And you get an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show, including myself. I will be there as well, so you can talk to me. And go to lockedonaggies.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Really good Christmas gift, Everydayer Club, if you're a Locked On Aggies listener, or somebody you love is a Locked On Aggies listener. But the transfer portal is starting to heat up. Texas A&M has already lost one player to the portal. Tristan Jernigan, linebacker, made his exit with his intent to enter the portal. I believe it was on Monday. It won't be the last. Texas A&M is also losing Casey Concepcion and Will Lee III, Armaj Reed Adams, Trey Zune, Demetrius Crownover. Who else? Nate Borkature.
Scooby Williams, I think.
Scooby Williams, Le'Veon Moss. And that's just
EJ Smith.
EJ Smith, just to name a few. You're also talking about Albert Regis, Tyler Onyedem, Dayan Hayes. Let's see, Tyreek Chappelle. There's Bryce Anderson. Looks like he's going to get a red shirt after what happened this year. But by and large, you're losing a lot of starters off of a team that went 11-1 and made the college football playoff and was one game away from an SEC title. You're going to have to figure out a way to replace those losses. So I thought that Zach and I would give you our biggest portal needs and then, some targets that we think should fill those needs. I'm going to go first here. I think that there's a couple of different guys that we could talk about to replace this player, but I think the big name that we're all talking about right now is Casey Concepcion, who announced his intentions to enter the NFL draft yesterday on Monday, and there has already been reports about one player that Texas A&M is targeting to potentially fill that hole, and I know you've got that one, Zach.
Yeah, so on threes, Pete Nakos, actually, I believe it was today, he said that Texas A&M is a school of note for Kansas State wide receiver Jace Brown. Interesting name there. This guy, he's been at Kansas State for 3 seasons now. Pretty productive for the most part. It wasn't exactly the season that K-State had envisioned this year, but he had 712 yards this year, 5 touchdowns, 41 catches, 7 carries for 116 yards and a touchdown. He's shown that he's on the smaller side, 6 foot, 179 pounds, shown explosiveness, had a 75-yard rushing touchdown this year. Could this guy come in and maybe be a Casey Concepcion sort of versatile guy on offense you can rely on alongside Mario Craver? I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on this guy. I haven't done a bunch of film study or anything. I don't know exactly what he'll bring to the table, but the fact that he has, already been connected to A&M early on in this, process for the Aggies after, their season only ended a few days ago, that shows that they got some, pretty decent interest in him. Had 300-yard receiving games this year. So, interesting there. Wide receiver isn't necessarily the top of the list for portal needs, in my opinion, because you already have Mario Craver coming back. You're re-signing to that contract, still trying to get used to that vocabulary there. But, also got Ashton Bethel Roman. You hope Terry Bussey, maybe improves a little bit next season. I know it was kind of a quiet year for him. I do think you have to really address the offensive line, especially when you give up 7 sacks in the college football playoff game. I think every team would want to address the offensive line every offseason if they could. But interesting name to watch there on offense, especially when you're losing a guy like Casey Concepcion. If Marcel Reed is still going to be that guy next year, you want to make sure you continue to supply him with a bunch of weapons. And I think Jace Brown, he'd come in with experience and proven production. So definitely a name to watch for sure.
Yeah, and another one that I wanted to bring up as well, Marquis Johnson from Missouri. He's a very similar player to in the slot to Jace Brown. He has over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns in his career. He's a Texas native, so maybe he wants to come home. And then another idea that kind of pops into mind is, do you move Mario Craver inside to that slot position where Casey Concepcion spent the majority of his time, and bring in another outside receiver? And I think an interesting name that you could talk about there is Nick Marsh out of Michigan State. He's totaled over 2,600 yards and 200 catches with Michigan State. And if he's a big body, he's a Texas native, first of all, big body, 6'3". You could put him on the outside. You can move Mario Craver on the inside, and that could be an interesting thing there. But I tend to agree with you. Offensively, I think that the focus should primarily be along the offensive line because you're losing all of those guys. First of all,
Yep.
You're losing Trey Zune, you're losing Armaj Reed Adams, you're losing Demetrius Crownover, you're losing Coley Fao. I mispronounce that terribly every single time. And Ruben Fothery as well is a senior, and you've got some younger talent along the offensive line, but I think you need to bring in some more talent. A couple of guys that have entered the portal recently out of LSU, Cohen Eccles, who has been at LSU for a period of time, and the more interesting name I think to me is Carius Kearney. I don't know if it's Kern or Kearney. I have to do a little research there, but he was rated the number 1 offensive player in the state of Arkansas when he was coming out. He's going to have plenty of eligibility left. I know that his offensive coach or his offensive coordinator, maybe he was his head coach in high school, said that this kid was going to be a top 10 NFL draft pick. There's a lot of noise surrounding Arkansas with his recruitment, but I think that Texas A&M is in the conversation there. And then, obviously offensive tackle, because you're losing all 3 of your top tackles coming out this year. So, if you want to look at the tackle position, Malachi Breland out of Memphis, Josh Atkins out of Arizona State. Atkins is an Arlington native out of Mansfield Timberview. There's a few names there that could be very interesting. But this offensive line certainly needs to be rebuilt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you have that kind of experience on the O-line, like you did this season, if you're A&M, it's hard to just kind of replicate all that and expect, that you're just going to add all these veterans out of the portal. It's going to take some portal additions, going to take some development, obviously, with your incoming class, some of your younger guys from this season. So that's the thing about offensive linemen. It's going to be hard out of the portal, but if you can add 1 or 2 guys in that regard, that can make all the difference. Listen, I just think that the 7 sacks against Miami, it's definitely not a good look, but that's an elite front 7 that the Hurricanes had. It was overall a really good year for A&M's offensive line. So if you can still add some talent, still develop at the high school and freshman level, heading into next season, I think A&M is going to be fine in that regard. But yeah, listen, you can't have that happen in the biggest game of the season. That's for sure.
Yeah, and then one other position offensively. We'll get into some defensive targets in tomorrow's show. But one other position I think that could potentially need to be addressed is running back. Le'Veon Moss was your hammer. Le'Veon Moss was your guy that you counted on in short yardage situations when he was healthy. And, E.J. Smith is going to be gone. Amari Daniels is going to be gone. Le'Veon Moss is going to be gone. I know that you have Jamarian Morrow. I know that you're bringing in KJ Edwards, and I know that Ruben Owens is coming back. But I think that you need a hammer. You need another powerful back. And in the portal, there are a couple of guys who fit that mold. Adam Muhammad out of Glendale, Arizona. He just entered the portal out of Washington. He's one of the more powerful guys at the position in the portal. And then Mekhi Frazier out of Michigan State, who's a McKinney, Texas native, is another guy you could look at. And I think and Cam Edwards also out of UConn is an interesting name to me. He's 5'10", 210 pounds, and Mike Elko has those Northeastern connections, but I think that that's a position where you need to find another body, even though you've had success recruiting there over the last couple of years. But like I said, we'll talk about more portal targets and more portal needs on the defensive side of the ball tomorrow. Let's get into our third segment here, Zach. When we come back, we are going to talk about the offensive and defensive coordinator position and whether or not we think Mike Elko made the right choice. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game. You're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets on the action as it unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, and every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into that moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. And you can bet next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, and more. And it just keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Well, a lot of turnover for the Aggies, not just with players, as we talked about in the last segment, but coaches as well. Colin Klein is now the head coach at Kansas State. Jay Bateman has moved on to Kentucky in a move that seems like it was a mutual decision, like, hey, just go find a soft landing spot because we're going to do something different. You also lose Jordan Peterson to Kansas State as well. And you've made some hires to help replace these losses. Both of them were, and let's not forget Sean Spencer, defensive line coach, goes to Virginia Tech. You bring back Elijah Robinson from Syracuse. But in terms of the coordinators, you've made a couple of hires to replace those losses. They're internal hires, which sometimes I can be a fan of. Other times I'm not so sure. Texas A&M promotes Holman Wiggins to full-time offensive coordinator, and he's going to call the plays. And they hire they promote Lyle Hemphill to full-time defensive coordinator. I believe Mike Elko is still going to call the plays there. And Elijah Robinson is going to be co-defensive coordinator with him as well. The question is, after such a disappointing end to the season and the way that this team played over the last 3 weeks, really, was that the right choice? Should we have brought in some fresh blood and kind of made a change in the way that we operate? Kind of like Texas did with Will Muschamp. That's going to change what they do schematically from a defensive standpoint because they were struggling defensively. I feel like Texas A&M should have tried to make a similar move. A home run hire at offensive coordinator, for example, considering your struggles over the last, couple of weeks, or maybe, a home run hire at defensive coordinator where, maybe you can take that off of Mike Elko's plate, the defensive play calling. Like Jay Bateman didn't do a very good job there over the last couple of years. Maybe you needed some fresh blood in there. I don't know. I think they should have done something different. I like Holman Wiggins. I think he's a tremendous recruiter. I think he's a really, really good coach. He's never called plays before, and that really concerns me.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, with the not calling plays with Holman Wiggins, that was the biggest question whenever I saw that news, last week or whenever that was, because we've talked about it on the show. The recruiting pedigree is certainly there, but yeah, he's never been an OC anywhere, and so he's got the ability to coach the wide receivers. He even played running back in college. He knows the skill positions very, very well. But play calling, he hasn't even done that at like the Group of 5 level, according to his resume. So certainly interesting. You have to give him a chance at least. And clearly, we don't know what we're talking about. We're just a bunch of doofuses, and Mike Elko obviously knows what he's doing. But it is certainly interesting when you're a program like A&M to hire a guy who hasn't called plays. But I mean, I guess you got to start somewhere. You got to let him prove himself. If you want to look at it from a positive light with Holman Wiggins, he has that chemistry with Marcel Reed. He's going to have the chemistry with the receivers. You may bring in someone new, but for the most part, it's going to be most of the same guys. So yeah, maybe that'll all work itself out. Give them an off season to figure all that stuff out the way they want, and I think it could work. But yeah, it's gonna fast forward next fall, and A&M's offense is struggling. People are gonna question if it was the right hire because this guy hasn't called plays before. That is a potential reality we could be living in. So, but until further notice, you just got to give him a chance. With Hemphill, Mike Elko worked with him at Duke. They have a good chemistry there. The defensive coordinator side of things isn't as big of a deal to me, just because, like you mentioned, Elko is still going to be, manning the controls there. But I think their chemistry that they've had at Duke, Hemphill was also at James Madison, which is a very productive group of 5 program. So I don't know. I think that's not as big of a deal as the Wiggins stuff, but it is going to be something to watch because the run defense, we saw the first game against UTSA, we saw it late in the season against Texas, and the loss in Austin, and we saw it in the loss to Miami. The run defense was not good enough. It was pretty poor, and was the reason A&M season came to an end. So whoever's the defensive coordinator, I don't care who it is, you got to figure that part out because that is the reason that A&M is not playing right now.
So here's my biggest issue with Holman Wiggins. And like I said, I like the guy. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's a tremendous recruiter, and I do think he deserves an opportunity to call plays. I just don't know that he deserves an opportunity to call plays at an SEC level for his first crack at the job.
Right.
You are hanging your 2026 season on a guy who has never done it before, and that really concerns me. I obviously this style of offense is very, I like to kind of, and maybe I'm off here because, I'm not a football coach, but I kind of compare this style of offense and what A&M does successfully in terms of explosive plays and relying on explosive plays so much to score points rather than sustained drives. It's kind of like living and dying by the 3-point shot in basketball. Like if you're off and like the defense is stopping your explosive plays in football, or you're not hitting your threes in basketball, you're going to have a really rough night. And that happened to Texas A&M more times than not over the course of the end of the season. I mean, for 5 of the final 6 halves of their of their season, they couldn't hit those explosive plays, and it led to 2 losses and a near upset loss to the worst team in the SEC. So I am of the opinion that they probably should have made a philosophy shift on the offensive side of the ball. But if you don't do that, like a complete philosophy shift, I think that you should have brought in somebody who can run the system that you want to run, but has experience doing it on a big time level. And Holman Wiggins just doesn't have that. And look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he will be 10 times better than Colin Klein at calling plays. The odds of that are pretty slim because Colin Klein was a really, really good offensive coordinator for Texas A&M, and that's the reason he's the head coach at Kansas State. And the fact that you're hanging your hat and putting all of your chips on the board in 2026 to a guy and giving that responsibility to a guy that has never done it before is scary. And that's, we're going to have to wait and see whether or not Mike Elko made the right choice. I trust Mike Elko. I think he's one of the better coaches in college football, and I think he's a brilliant guy. So we'll just have to take his decision and give him the benefit of the doubt and see where it goes. But that's going to do it for another episode of Locked On Aggies. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Aggies. Like I said, tomorrow we will be getting into some more portal needs and portal targets that Texas A&M could pursue on the defensive side of the ball. We'll talk a little bit more about the college football playoff and pretty much everything in between. You can find us on X at Locked On Aggies, on TikTok at Locked On Aggies. You can find me on X at Matt Galatzan. You can find Zach on X at Zach Dimmitt 7. And if you need a last-minute holiday gift or someone keeps asking you what you want, make it easy. Ask for the Everydayer Club. Ad-free episodes of this show, exclusive Discord server access, and more. And subscriptions can be gifted through the custom link in our bio, lockedonaggies.supercast.com. For those of you on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. On audio, make sure your second listen is Locked On College Football. And we'll see you next time.